Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're looking at this pile of sources, really, that show how a late-night monologue, something you might not think matters much, suddenly became this flashpoint.
Yeah, a constitutional flashpoint, no less. Wasn't just entertainment.
Right. We're diving into Jimmy Kimmel's pretty dramatic return to TV, how his monologue set off this huge national talk about free speech, government maybe going too far, and, how comedy and politics just collided.
It really was a key moment. We've got transcripts, news clips, some insider notes,
Yeah.
and they all point to this being like the most anticipated monologue in late night in years.
Wow.
So our goal for you listening is to get past just the show itself and really understand the political and, frankly, broadcast history being made right then.
Okay, so we had the details of him coming back after the show was, well, pulled temporarily. Well, look at what he said to clarify the original comments, the, immense pressure,
Right.
and how his show ended up being the center for debates on everything, like the First Amendment, even press credentials. It's
Yeah.
wild.
Absolutely. And this deep dive, it's sort of your shortcut to grasping that tricky relationship between power and speaking out in America today. We'll focus on how these basic rights get tested when comedy kind of pokes the bear and who stood up for the principle and some of those names. Really surprising. Okay, let's get into it.
Yeah, let's start with the feeling around his return. It wasn't just, another Tuesday night show. Sources were calling it a huge moment in American history, even one of those pivotal moments in broadcast history. Kimmel himself said the reaction over those 6 days when things were up in the air was just overwhelming. Like, everyone I have ever met has reached out 10 or 11 times.
That level of response, it really shows how seriously people took the idea that someone was trying to silence him. And of course, all the late night folks reached out. Colbert, Stewart, Seth Meyers, Fallon.
Right, the usual suspects.
Oliver, Conan, Corden, Arsenio, Kathy, Wanda, Chelsea, even Jay Leno. But it went way beyond just colleagues checking in.
That's the bit that really stands out, isn't it? Totally random people. He mentioned the guy Larry, who fired him from his first radio job way back in '89.
Oh, yeah.
Because he wouldn't do some bit called Jokes for Donuts. Even that guy wrote to him, just to cheer him up.
Wow.
And it was global, too. Hosts in Ireland, Germany.
Yeah.
The German guy apparently offered him a job.
So the feeling was definitely that something fundamentally undemocratic was happening, like an attack on basic principles.
Exactly. And here's where, for understanding the political side of things, it gets really interesting. The people from the political right who spoke up.
Yeah, that was the big surprise for many. They defended his right to say what he believes, even though they, strongly disagree with his actual politics.
The list included Ben Shapiro, Clay Travis, Candace Owens,
Yeah.
even Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul.
It's like the most unlikely alliance you could imagine, right?
Yeah.
All defending a comedian who regularly criticized them.
Yeah.
But that's because they weren't defending Kimmel, the person, or his views. They were defending the principle, the Constitution.
Ted Cruz had that really powerful quote, didn't he?
He did. He basically said, look, I hate what Kimmel said. I'm thrilled he was fired. But then he added the crucial part. But let me tell you, if the government gets in the business of saying, can't say what the media have said, we're going to ban you from the airwaves if you don't say what we like, that will end up bad for conservatives.
That nails it. It shows that, when things get really tense politically, the First Amendment is kind of like an insurance policy for everyone.
Precisely. It's fascinating. It's the defense of the rule, not the player. It just highlights that core idea.
Yeah.
You defend the right, even for speech you find, well, awful.
Right.
Because if you let that wall get breached, censorship eventually comes for your speech too. This whole thing was just a very clear, modern example of that playing out across the aisle.
Okay, so before getting into the deeper political threats, Kimmel did address the original comments that started it all.
Yes, he needed to clear the air on that first.
He made it really clear he never meant to make light of the murder of a young man or to blame any specific group. He said he'd posted a message sending, love and compassion to the family involved.
And he acknowledged that maybe the timing was off or wasn't clear. He said ill-timed or unclear or maybe both.
Right. And setting that straight then allowed him to pivot to the bigger picture, the larger stakes.
Exactly. He basically said, look, my show, it's not important, but living in a country that allows a show like mine, that's important. He mentioned talking to comedians overseas, Russia, the Middle East, places where they told him they'd literally be thrown in prison for making fun of powerful people.
Which makes what happened next feel even more serious. The sources say the actions against his show went way beyond just a temporary suspension. He called it un-American.
Yeah, specifically pointing to getting his friend Stephen Colbert pulled off the air, too, and these widespread attempts to pressure local stations, the affiliates, into dropping his show completely.
So let's talk about that pressure on affiliates.
Mm.
How real was that? I mean, Disney, the parent company, welcomed him back.
That's the tricky part. Even with Disney's backing, the sources show his program was still not being broadcast in 20% of the country.
20%. That's
Yeah.
huge. Places like D.C., Nashville, New Orleans, Portland, Salt Lake City, St. Louis.
Yeah.
Major markets.
It is huge. And the threat is the story, but the coercion becomes tangible because of the FCC. Local stations, the affiliates, they need the FCC for their broadcast licenses to operate.
Ah, okay.
So the government doesn't need a formal ruling to make life difficult. They just need to signal that renewing a license or dealing with regulations might suddenly get very, very complicated and expensive.
So the affiliates might just decide it's easier to comply with what they think the government wants politically rather than risk all that additional work from the regulators.
Exactly. It's preemptive compliance, driven by the underlying threat. That's why that 20% blackout was so significant. It showed the pressure was having a real effect.
Okay, that makes sense. And that really sets up the main target of his monologue then, FCC Chairman Brendan Carr.
Correct. Kimmel laid it out pretty bluntly. He alleged Carr went to an American company and essentially laid down a threat, something like, we can do this the easy way or the hard way.
Wow.
Implying they had to find ways to, quote, change conduct and take action on Kimmel, or there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead.
And Ted Cruz called that statement mafioso-like. But Kimmel joked about the irony, right? That Carr apparently said this on a podcast.
Yeah, not exactly a smoke-filled back room. Kimmel quipped that this particular genius did it out in the open, not like in some deli needing a hidden mic. The sheer lack of subtlety is kind of amazing.
But it gets worse when you look back, doesn't it? The hypocrisy?
Oh, absolutely. That's the staggering contradiction the source material brings out. Just back in 2022, this same Brendan Carr, who was then an FCC commissioner under Biden, wrote this whole piece praising political satire.
You're kidding.
Nope. He wrote quite clearly that satire is one of the oldest and most important forms of free speech. That's why people in influential positions have always targeted it for censorship.
So the guy being targeted for censorship is pointing out that the person doing the targeting previously wrote a big defense of the very thing he's now attacking.
It just shows how fast political convenience can, well, overtake principles.
Yeah, Kimmel's own reaction was pretty simple. If we don't have free speech, then we just don't have a free country. It's as simple as that.
And the way the communication was described, it sounded like pure intimidation. Like the message was, speech ain't free no more, and the FCC's charging by the word. Whether that was literal or figurative, the intent seemed clear. Make it costly to criticize power.
Which is just fundamentally against the whole idea of the First Amendment.
Totally.
And this fight over controlling information, it wasn't just about late-night comedy, was it? The sources point to something maybe even more worrying with the press. This new policy from Pete Iseth at the Pentagon.
Yeah, this is a really important connection to make. It shows the impulse to control dissent isn't isolated. This new Pentagon rule basically makes journalists with credentials sign a pledge.
A pledge? About what?
Promising not to report information unless it's been specifically authorized for release by the Pentagon. And here's the kicker. This applies even if the information they get is totally unclassified.
Wait, unclassified. So, information that isn't secret, that arguably the public has a right to know.
Right.
Reporters now have to promise not to report it if the Pentagon hasn't pre-approved it.
That's the gist. It shifts the dynamic completely. The Pentagon basically gets to pick and choose what the news is, even for non-secret information.
That sounds less like reporting and more like just taking dictation. It really undermines the press's role as a watchdog, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. When the line moves from protecting actual classified secrets to just controlling unauthorized reporting of non-secrets, that's a major shift. It's narrative control through bureaucracy, not necessarily outright censorship, but maybe just as effective.
Okay, so we have the FCC issue, the Pentagon press issue, and then there was this other really charged topic Kimmel brought up, the Tylenol and autism claims.
Right, and that tied back to the start of his monologue, because he had mentioned the Tylenol CEO. This claim, linking Tylenol use during pregnancy to autism, was being pushed by some big names. Donald Trump, RFK Jr., Dr. Oz.
And their recommendation was pretty stark.
Extremely. The sources quote them strongly advising that pregnant women stop taking Tylenol immediately.
The language used in the source material to describe this warning sounds really intense.
Oh, it is. It's repetitive, almost alarmist. Don't take Tylenol again and again. Fight like hell not to take it. And specifically, don't give Tylenol to the baby. It's presented by one side as this major breakthrough in the field of medicine.
But the source material also presents a sharp disagreement, right? It kind of juxtaposes that view with the potential dangers of not treating fever or pain, especially during pregnancy.
Exactly. It mentions the counter-argument implicitly from the medical establishment, suggesting avoiding Tylenol could lead to serious health problems, even using that really vivid negative description.
The glazed ham with deep vein thrombosis line.
Yeah. Right. So you, the listener, are presented with these totally opposing viewpoints within the source text itself. You have to sort through that conflict.
So, looking back at these last couple of segments, the underlying theme seems to be this struggle over who controls information, whether it's jokes, military news, or health advice.
Yeah, who gets to define what's true, what's acceptable to say, and who has the power to punish dissent? That seems to be the core battle.
Okay, let's shift back to the monologue itself towards the end.
Yeah.
He tried to find something positive, didn't he? A potential silver lining.
He did. After all the conflict and division, he looked for common ground.
Pointing out issues where polls show most Americans actually agree, regardless of politics.
Yeah, a list of pretty fundamental things: keeping kids safe from guns, women's reproductive rights, protecting Social Security, making healthcare affordable, funding pediatric cancer research. Basic stuff.
And that's when he kind of turned it back on the audience, didn't he? Urging people to stop letting politicians dictate terms and instead tell them what we want.
Exactly. Shifting the focus from the political drama back to, like you said, common sense, practical decency.
And he closed with that really moving story.
Oh, the anecdote about Erica Kirk forgiving the man who shot her husband. He called it a selfless act of grace forgiveness from a grieving widow.
Yeah, and he connected it to faith, saying, if you believe in the teachings of Jesus as I do, there it was. It felt like a plea for just basic human connection and empathy after all the fighting.
A very powerful way to end, definitely.
So wrapping this deep dive up,
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty clear a single monologue really did unpack some huge national issues.
Yeah.
We saw this fight for free speech against what looked like government pressure, the whole complicated mess of controlling information from the SEC to the Pentagon's press rules, and yet these surprising moments where people came together when basic rights seemed threatened.
And the sources really drive home that these rights, they aren't just abstract ideas. They affect real people, local TV stations, livelihoods, and ultimately our ability to, question authority.
That seems to be the crucial takeaway.
Yeah. And it leaves us with a pretty pointed question, doesn't it? If a threat aimed at silencing a comedian gets called out as anti-American,
Right.
then how careful, how vigilant should we be about defending other rights we might take for granted? Like freedom of the press, especially when the rules shift towards controlling information that's not even secret, just unauthorized.
That idea of unauthorized versus unclassified, that's definitely something to chew on.
Right.
How much power are we okay with the government having to shape what reality we get to see?
Exactly. Something for you to think about long after we sign off.
Well, thank you for joining us for this Deep Dives. We'll catch you next time.